In the past, it was a staple of kidnappings for the hostage to hold up a newspaper to prove that they're still alive. The problem with me is that I started reading the newspapers I was holding up, although I'm still, as you can judge by our social media overlords, in captivity. Nevertheless, I'll try my best to get what news I can out to you given the constraints. First up, stories on the domestic news front that I'm tracking. Your briefing begins with the headline. House Judiciary Panel Report exposes massive government surveillance of Americans' financial data. The Biden administration has been accused by the House Judiciary Committee and its select subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government of conducting unlawful, broad surveillance of citizens' private financial data without a warrant and with no evidence of any crimes being committed by the individuals. According to the report, federal law enforcement, including the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, and the FBI colluded with large financial institutions in the United States such as Barclays, U.S. Bank, Charles Schwab, HSBC, Bank of America, PayPal, and many others in what boiled down to a fishing expedition for Americans' financial data. Tactics included keywords filtering of transactions targeting terms like MAGA and Trump, as well as purchases of books, religious texts, firearms-related items, and recreational stores like Cabela's, Bass Pro Shop, and Dick's Sporting Goods, the report said. This surveillance extended well beyond criminal suspicion, likely encompassing millions of Americans with conservative viewpoints or Second Amendment interests. Maybe a government that can't balance its own budget has no business snooping in other people's accounts. Odd behavior for a group of autocrats who hate accountability. At any rate, on to international news. World War III watch. Polish foreign minister says sending NATO troops into Ukraine is not unthinkable. The Kremlin has warned that if NATO sends combat troops, a direct conflict between the alliance and Russia would be inevitable. Russian President Vladimir Putin said such a move would risk a global nuclear conflict. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk was among those European leaders who ruled out sending troops to Ukraine after Macron's remarks, saying, Poland does not plan to send its troops to the territory of Ukraine. Sikorski did not speak of a plan to send Polish troops to Ukraine, but struck a different tone. The presence of NATO forces in Ukraine is not unthinkable, he said, according to the foreign ministry. He said he appreciated Macron's initiative because it is about Putin being afraid, not about us being afraid of Putin. Polish President Andrzej Duda and Prime Minister Tusk will travel to Washington for a meeting at the White House next Tuesday. The Poles are hoping to spur the United States to do more to help Ukraine. What Americans have to understand is that Poland is not really operating at the behest of Poland. It's kind of like a puppeteer with a puppet, with NATO being the kind of marionette master that is kind of choreographing these moves. Just as the CIA, I'll give you an example, just as the CIA essentially had its base, its largest base of operations in Latin America and Honduras, and you would see all sorts of kind of nefarious things radiating out from that Honduran, central hub. Poland has now become the CIA's kind of hotbed as NATO kind of pivots east to, take a more aggressive stance toward Russia in the particular and Eurasia in the general, right? So they're trying to basically make their final move to, forever kind of shut down the possibility that the world economic center will shift from the Atlantic to its historical norm, which is Central Asia. And so Poland is a very important pivot point right now. The CIA is operating out of there. NATO is operating out of there. The Poles are really not in charge. So this is kind of, a lot of, posturing, and a lot of stagecraft. But yeah, Poland is now the Honduras of Europe insofar as being a client state of the Atlanticist grid. And the biggest worry here is not World War III, but that World War II never ended. That is one of the things that we have to contend with. We talked last week about a gentleman named Vannevar Bush. And he was the head of MIT at one point, and he was one of the early guys who was lobbying back in the 1920s for what we today call a military-industrial complex. He was looking over at Germany after the last Great War, and Germany never demilitarized, and he was looking at all these amazing things coming out of Germany that were government funded. like the jet, or nuclear programs, all these kind of things that were making Germany bigger and more powerful. And he was looking with contempt at the United States behaving constitutionally. So we decommissioned after World War I. And he was saying that was a big mistake, and we should be more like, Prussian militarism, and we should be on a permanent war footing. And of course, there should be an establishment of a relationship between academia, which he represented, and the government and military, so that they could get permanent funding. And so basically he gets his way. He makes his pitch to FDR. And it is Vannevar Bush, by the way, who was in charge of the Manhattan Project. He was Oppenheimer's boss. And, he was the guy pulling the strings. He also founded a military contractor called Raytheon. You may have heard of it. And, it is still, in the 21st century, a huge player, 100 years after, Vannevar Bush set the stage for all of this. So we're in a situation now where he got his way, and the United States never essentially ended the war. We are still occupying Europe. We still have institutions that were supposed to be temporary, right? Like I remember talking to somebody, a young lady, who was asking whether she should, kind of marry her boyfriend because she would get more benefits if they moved in the military. They would get better housing and stuff like that. And I said, well, do you love the young man? And she was like, well, I'm not sure, but it would just be more convenient. And I told her, I said, never make a permanent solution for a temporary problem, right? So if you're having housing problems right now or whatever, don't do a permanent thing for a temporary thing. And we kind of did that. We created NATO, which was supposed to be against the USSR. Well, the USSR went away. So did NATO go away? No. We created a permanent solution for a temporary problem. Same thing with the CIA in 47. Permanent solution for a temporary problem. So basically the war never ended, and we still use weapons of war like psychological operations, except now it's being used against our own population. These are weapons of war. These were designed specifically as a tool of war, and now it's turned on and it has never been turned off. And that's one of the biggest dangers is that, who was it? I think it was Herbert Spencer. He said he was a philosopher in England in the 19th century. And he said, one of the biggest drivers of social change to a society is war. It will alter and warp the institutions in that country, and you will never get your country back. And so that's one of the biggest dangers that we have is not World War III, but that World War II never actually ended. And you may find that weird, but that leads us into the news of the weird. Speaking of weird things coming out of war, male soldiers in Spain are changing their genders to receive better benefits and higher pay. Just when you thought you've hit peak transgender, you ain't seen nothing yet. That's because soldiers in Spain are starting to change their genders from male to female to earn benefits that are only available to females, according to a new report from the New York Post. The benefits include higher pay and better sleeping quarters, and the gender switch has been made possible due to the military's honoring of a self-identification law, which was put in place in 2023 to help transgender people. The report points out that 41 men in Spain's North African autonomous city Ceuta now list as female after the law change. Only 4 have changed their name, and a majority of them have kept, wait for it, their male genitalia and even their beards, according to the report. Army Corporal Roberto Perdigones commented, "On the outside, I feel like a heterosexual man, but on the inside, I'm a lesbian. And it is the latter that counts. This is why I made the legal change to become a woman." He added, "For changing my gender, I've been told that my pension has gone up because women get more to compensate for inequality. I also get 15% more salary for being a mother. I even have a private room in the barracks all to myself with a private bathroom. This is because I cannot be with men as I am a woman, and I did not consider it appropriate to be with biological women out of respect for them," he added. That plus all the biological men in women's sports establishes definitively that all meaningful demographic data is essentially dead. And speaking of dead, that leads us into our obituary segment. Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama dead at 68. Akira Toriyama, the creator of the best-selling Dragon Ball and other popular anime who influenced Japanese comics, has died, his studio said Friday. He was 68. Toriyama's Dragon Ball manga series, which started in 1984, has sold millions of copies globally and was adapted into hugely popular animated TV shows, video games, and films. Toriyama died March 1st of a blood clot in his brain, Bird Studio said in a statement. Blood clot in the brain, huh? Well, due to our social media overlords, I don't think I'll be commenting on that one, so I will leave that there, and I'd like to thank you for watching the show, or as I like to call it, that suspicious gap in my resume. See you next time. Consider subscribing to my new podcast, Classic Paranormal. It's a clearinghouse for lost real-life accounts of true ghost stories. It's found on Apple Podcasts. Go there now if you're interested in enigmatic tales, chilling true accounts, chronicles from cases of the past that time has forgotten, but that the modern person who likes relaxing by a campfire swapping ghost stories might appreciate. As I said, the new podcast I'm launching is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and there's a link in the description below on this video.